Chapter 15, Core Justice. Here we go. Chapter 15, Camp Spartan, Arrington, Tennessee. Cal awoke to the thin stream of light coming from the curtain-covered bay windows. His eyes focused on Brian, asleep in the leather chair across the room. I'll bet he's been sitting there all night. He tested his balance as he slowly rose into a seated position. His wounds still throbbed, but they'd be muted a bit after a couple painkillers. Cal quietly shuffled to the bathroom to relieve himself. After he was done, he brushed his teeth, washed his face, and threw down 2 pain pills. Time for breakfast. As he walked back into the main room, Brian got up from his chair and did a quick stretch while yawning. "How you feeling, Cal?" "All right." "Listen, about my bawling last night, Don't worry about it. I'm glad you got it out. Now we can work on getting you better." Cal nodded, allowing himself this tiny bit of humility. "So what's on the schedule for today's torture?" Brian chuckled. "Travis stopped by while you were passed out, and he said you guys have a nice gym on campus." "That we do. I thought I'd wheel you over there and we could do some stretches and PT. You up for it?" "Yeah, I need some fresh air." "Good. Me too. Let me go take a leak and then I'll help you get changed. You want to eat before or after?" "Let's do after. I don't want to puke up everything at the gym. My gut's still not right." "Cool. Give me a minute and we'll head out." 15 minutes later, the pair emerged from the suite. Cal rested comfortably in an off-road looking wheelchair. Probably some super upgrade Trav hooked up for me. At least they could take it on some of the trails if they wanted. After leaving the lodge, Cal directed Brian to take a left and head down 3 blocks. As they traveled, Cal described some of the surrounding buildings. "That one over there is the mess hall, and the one behind that is the HQ." At a brisk pace, they reached the gym in only a couple minutes. Although sparsely decorated, it looked to Brian like all the newest equipment was housed within the facility. "This is the main area with free weights and machines," Cal said. "We've got a cardio room around the corner that has flat screens. Where should we start?" Cal looked around. "Let's head over to that spot with the mats. We'll kill some stretches first." 30 minutes later, Cal was drenched in sweat and panting with exertion. The stretching alone had been excruciating for the wounded warrior. Moving onto the treadmill felt like death. Nevertheless, he finished the tortuous physical therapy session with a determined smile on his face. It felt good to move again. Brian stood up and surveyed his patient. "All right, that's good for today, Cal." Cal nodded and rolled over. "Let's go get some food, and then I want to introduce you to some people." Cal looked at his friend quizzically, but kept his mouth shut and helped Cal into the wheelchair. The duo left the gym facility and headed toward the chow hall. As they entered, the smell of scrambled eggs and pancakes greeted them. They found a booth in the corner, and Cal took a seat. What do you want me to get for you?" Brian asked. 2 eggs over easy, country ham, a stack of pancakes, and some orange juice." "Got it. I'll be right back." The companions finished breakfast with the occasional greeting from company employees who stopped by to say hello to Cal. Brian noticed that rather than be embarrassed or standoffish, Cal spoke openly with the visitors and knew most by their first names. It wasn't something he'd expected, and mentioned this on the way out of the dining facility. "Yeah, I've spent a lot of time on both campuses over the years," Cal explained. "I've even been in on some of the hiring interviews. Dad really wanted me to see the inner workings at SSI and included me whenever he could. I even had a hand in hiring some employees. That reminds me, take a left up here. I want to introduce you to somebody." Brian took the next left. They walked down 4 blocks. Not sure why I said blocks, because I don't really see Camp Spartan having blocks. Anyway, they walked down 4 blocks, finally reaching a low structure. Brian pointed at the front door and Cal nodded. As they passed through the double doors, the former corpsman noticed the pressurized feel as the heavy glass door sucked back into place. "What is this place?" Brian asked. "We call it the Bat Cave." "Guess that makes you Batman?" said Brian. The 2 strolled up to the front desk. The 2 security guards, heavily armed, greeted Cal by his first name, coming around the desk to shake his hand. It was obvious to Brian that both men, each the size of an NFL linebacker, liked and respected Cal. These weren't some employees attempting to suck up to the future boss. These guys really admired Cal, and it seems that they held him on some sort of pedestal. Interesting. They waved goodbye, Cal promising to meet the 2 guards at the gym soon, and headed to the bank of elevators. They boarded the first to arrive, and Brian shifted around to select the floor. There was There was only a second floor and 9 buttons below the first floor. A bunch of some subfloors. He looked at Cal questioningly. Press B9, Cal said. Brian pressed the very bottom button. 9 levels down? It took less than a minute for the elevator to descend and open its doors. As they opened, Brian smelled the incoming air. It smelled like the air wing hangars he remembered from his time with the Marines, the unique smell of oil, grease, and metal. The smell brought back a flood of memories from his time spent at Cherry Point and his cruises on the Gator freighters. Gator freighters, for all of you who don't know, are typically LSDs or LHDs. No, those aren't drugs. They are not... How do I say this without being completely tongue-tied? Almost like mini aircraft carriers that hold Marines and take us all over the world. Cal took a deep breath. Okay, before we head down to see Neil, I want to give you a little background. Neil was one of my finds for the company. We went to school together at UVA. He was 2 years ahead of me. He'd been my resident advisor my first year. Neil was a brilliant triple major who hardly studied. He was a funny mix of hip social butterfly and technological genius. I won't tell you what his IQ is because you won't believe me. So anyways, his family came over from India when Neil was a little kid. They didn't have a lot of money and really worked hard to make ends meet. Fortunately, his father was almost as smart as he is. Mr. Patel started a cell phone company out of his garage, if you can believe it. He grew it into this booming business that he exported back to India. Made a hell of a lot of cash. Neil grew up tinkering with the surplus cell phones his dad had lying around. Pretty soon, he was doing all the repairs for the company. He just had this knack for fixing and building stuff. There was this little joke around town that he could fix phones by looking at them. How'd he wind up in a dump like this? Brian joked. Cal smiled. Well, going into his 5th year at school, his mom and dad went on a trip to India, then over to Pakistan. Business trip. They were there to meet with contacts who were going to open a new headquarters for Mr. Patel's company. While they were in Pakistan, both of Neil's parents were kidnapped and later killed. Brian shook his head. Holy crap. Some tiny terrorist outfit claimed responsibility. No one was ever caught. I can't imagine how the son must have taken that, Brian said. Neil went into a real tailspin. He and his father were really close, and Neil didn't know how to cope. He went off the deep end, started drinking all the time, screwing anyone he could get his hands on, and started dabbling in drugs. Let's just say he didn't give a shit anymore. Cal looked up at the ceilings. So I bump into him one night at some party and notice he's a little crazier than I remember. I somehow convinced him to stick around and hang out with me. Over way too many drinks, he finally broke down and told me the story about his parents. Up to that point, I had no idea. It was obvious that he'd given up and didn't want to deal with life, let alone school. Then the poor dude passed out on my couch. What'd you do? At the time, I didn't know exactly what to do, but I knew I had to help the guy. We were little more than casual acquaintances, but he'd always been a great friend. I called my dad the next morning and explained the situation. Luckily, Dad was at the Charlottesville headquarters and asked that I set up a meeting with Neil. I agreed and somehow got a very hungover Neil into my car and out to Camp Cavalier. Cal chuckled. The coffee on the way seemed to revive him a bit, but pulling into the main gate really woke him up. Long story short, my dad instantly liked him and outlined his plan for Neil. He wanted Neil to lay off the partying and finish up school. Then he'd bring him on in the company's brand new R&D department. I think this might have done the trick, but Dad threw in a kicker. He promised Neil that if he came on board, SSI would do anything within its power to find the men responsible for the Patel's murder and bring them to justice. No shit? Yeah. By that time, Dad had some pretty serious contacts internationally and within most of our government's agencies. Not to mention SSI's intelligence gathering capabilities were really ramping up. Neil jumped at the chance and didn't let my dad down. 6 months after Neil graduated, the terrorist cell that took credit for Neil's parents' death were killed in a raid by Pakistani special forces. Justice was done. So Neil's been here ever since? Brian asked. Yeah, he and my dad really hit it off. Plus, in no time, Neil was leading the R&D department with some pretty heavy technological advances. My dad kept trying to get him to take a new title like head of R&D or vice president for R&D, but Neil always refused. He always said he's just a developer. Developer, huh? What kind of things does he develop? Brian asked. You name it, Cal said. It started with little tech gadgets for the military, small cameras, light weaponry, tactical gear. The guy was a triple engineering major. He'll tell you which ones, but I'll tell you they're all way over my head. Anyways, he and Dad figured out pretty quickly that rather than develop stuff for individual jobs, Neil could instead develop technology that SSI could license out to other entities. Call it the Microsoft model. That's when the company really started making a ton of money. Dad made an agreement with Neil that Neil could keep 50% of the sale of the sale or ongoing licensing fee from any of the stuff he researched and developed. Neil didn't want the deal, but Dad felt it was only fair. Let's just say that Neil will never have to worry about money ever again. So the guy knows his stuff, huh? He does, but he still tries to play the part of dumb gigolo. I never know how many girlfriends the guy had. I never know how many girlfriends the guy has. Let's go introduce you to Neil. So, we haven't quite met Neil yet, but we get a little history into Neil and Cal's relationship. And I love going back to this book because it reminds me that SSI was basically founded on second chancers. And Neil was very much a second chancer and somebody that Colonel Stokes brought on board to help and really helped him when they helped take down that terrorist cell. But I love digging back into these old characters because they're part of who I am. They've been part of my journey for over 10 years now. And I don't know, it's just fun to see them grow. So let's move on to the next chapter. But don't forget to subscribe, like, comment so that other people can find these videos and get into these books with you. So we'll be back in a second.